There is a heavy black pot on my stove tonight, the very same one my grandmother Della set on a wood range in the winter of 1934, and into it that February she put a dime's worth of soup bones and fed 7 people for most of a week. That pot has a burn scar on one handle and a bottom you could never see your face in, and it is the most valuable thing I own. What my grandmother did in it was not poverty cooking. It was the most skilled cooking that ever happened in that house, and this is 25 forgotten dinners that fed a whole family through the Depression. Most people hear Depression cooking and picture a family going hungry at a bare table. It was the opposite. A woman who could stretch one cheap cut across 4 suppers was not poor. She was rich in the one thing the checkout lane can never sell back to you. $1 supper was not going without. It was knowing something the rest of the street had already begun to forget. Before we start, settle in and hit that subscribe button, because everything we do here is spend less, waste nothing, and keep the kitchen wisdom the supermarket would rather you forget. So pull your chair in close, because tonight I am going to teach you every one of these dinners myself, all 25. The exact ones my grandmother Della cooked to keep 7 people fed through the leanest winters. She handed them down to me at this same stove, and tonight I am handing them down to you. Number 25. Fried liver and onions. Nobody wanted liver. The fashionable tables turned their noses up at it. The doctors sent it home for the pale and the tired. And that very snobbery is the whole reason it sat cheapest in the butcher's case. A woman named Lydia Maria Child wrote it down plain in a little book in 1832. Liver is much despised, and it is the cheapest of all animal food. Della bought it without one word of apology. She soaked the slices in a cup of cold milk for half an hour to take the sharp edge off, dredged them in flour, and laid them in hot fat with a heap of sliced onion until they were just cooked through and no further. The kitchen filled up with the smell of iron and sweet onion. She set it down in front of 7 people who thought they were being treated. That is the trick the squeamish never learned. The cheapest thing in the case was also the richest thing in the case, and she knew it, and she never once said she was sorry for it. Number 24. A pot of navy beans with a ham bone. Della kept a sack of navy beans in the pantry, the way other people kept money in the bank. It was always there, and it was always enough. She put a scoop of them to soak in cold water the night before, so that by morning they had swelled up, soft and patient in the bowl. Then she drained them, covered them in fresh water, and set them to a low simmer for an hour or 2 with an onion, a good spoon of salt, and whatever knuckle of ham bone was hanging in the spring house. A pound of dry beans fed 6 or 8 people, and it cost a fraction of any supper built on meat. The meat was only the seasoning in that pot. The bean was the meal. When February came and the money was thinnest, that plain sack in the corner was the reason nobody at her table ever went to bed frightened. A savings account you could eat. Number 23. Bone broth from a dime of bones. This is the pot I told you about. Della would walk to the butcher and ask for soup bones, and pay 10 or 12 cents for a parcel of them, because the good meat had already been carved away, and the butcher was mostly glad to be rid of the rest. She put them in the heavy black pot with an onion, a carrot and salt, and let them murmur 2 or 3 hours until the whole house went warm and savoury, clear out to the porch. She skimmed the fat off the top and saved it in a tin, because that fat was free shortening for tomorrow's baking. What was left in the pot was a full quart of rich broth. That same quart, in a carton at the store today, runs you $2 or $3. Della made it out of what the butcher had nearly thrown away, and she was honestly insulted by the idea of a person pouring it down a drain. 10 cents of bones, a week of warmth. She counted that a bargain, and she was right. Number 22. Scrambled eggs for supper. Della had no loyalty to the meat case. Some weeks she walked right past it because the eggs were cheaper that Tuesday, and she put scrambled eggs on the supper table on purpose and called it plain good sense. The government even printed the arithmetic of it. When 8 eggs cost you less than a pound of meat with its bone and fat, the egg was the better buy, and she did not need a bulletin to tell her what her own hand already knew at the counter. She scrambled them soft and slow in a little butter over low heat, and pulled them off the fire while they still looked a touch underdone, because eggs finish cooking in their own warmth after the pan is gone. A little toast alongside, and that was supper. There was never 1 ounce of shame at her table over the cheaper protein. There was only sense. The people who taught us to be embarrassed by a plate of eggs for dinner were selling us something, and she never once bought it. Number 21. Bread pudding. Della never let a single heel of bread reach the bin. The dry ends went onto a rack to harden, then into a jar as crumbs, and when the jar was full, there was pudding. She stirred the crumbs into milk with an egg, a spoon of sugar, and whatever spice the shelf held, cinnamon if it had been a good week, and baked it until it set firm and the top went gold and freckled. A sweet supper or a Sunday treat, built entirely out of the one thing most houses throw away without a second thought. The children were sure they were getting dessert. They were getting the bread bin, dressed up and smiling. Now remember that jar of crumbs. It is going to walk quietly through half of this whole list before we are done, and it is going to be the one that ends it. Number 20. Braised flank. The thick part of the thin flank. Della could stand at the butcher's case and tell you by looking which cut he had too much of that week, and that was the cut she carried home. Her favourite was what Child called the thick part of the thin flank, an honest slab of meat with very little bone in it, and in 1832 it ran 2 full cents a pound under the fashionable pieces. That gap has never once closed. At the same counter today, the forgotten cuts still run 20 to 40% below the loin and the rib. The only catch is that they will not be rushed. She browned it, covered it in the black pot with water and an onion and a bay leaf, and gave it 2 or 3 hours at a bare simmer until it pulled apart under the tines of a fork. The prettiest cut in the case fed you once. Della's ugly one fed you twice and cost her less doing it. Handsome is only as handsome feeds. Number 19. Shepherd's pie. Della had a name for the 3rd day of any stew. She called it Shepherd's Pie Day. Whatever meat was left, and it was never very much, went into a baking dish she had lined, sides and bottom, with a thin layer of seasoned mashed potato. She spooned the meat down into that potato shell, laid another layer of potato over the top, and baked it, hot, around 400 degrees, until it browned and looked for all the world like a thing she had planned from the very start, which, she would tell you, she had. If the top cracked as it baked, she brushed it with a little milk, so it came out with a pale gold crust, and the table was sure she had fussed over it. She had not fussed. She had refused to waste. A second whole supper, and not 1 new ounce of meat bought to make it happen. Hold on to that dish. It started its life somewhere else in this list, and before we finish, I am going to show you exactly where. Number 18. Chicken livers. If the beef liver was too strong for the little ones, Della bought chicken livers instead, milder and often cheaper still. So cheap the butcher sometimes tucked them in for nothing at all. A pound of them made a full supper for the whole table. She rolled them in seasoned flour and cooked them quick in hot fat until they were just done through and never 1 second longer, because a chicken liver cooked hard turns to a pebble, and a chicken liver cooked right turns to butter on the tongue. She spooned them over rice or over a slice of the day-old bread, and a supper that cost her almost nothing looked like something a fine restaurant would name after a Frenchman. The poorest thing in the shop, cooked with attention, outclassed the dearest thing in the shop, cooked with none. Attention was the one ingredient nobody ever charged her for. Number 17. Broth with barley. Here is what Della did with yesterday's broth so that it became today's dinner. She took that quart of bone broth from number 23, and into it she dropped a handful of barley, or a scoop of rice when the barley was gone, and let it swell in the pot until the thin broth became something with real body to it, something that could hold a spoon up. A few of last night's vegetables went in if there were any left. She did not measure. She had made it 10,000 times, and her hands knew the amounts the way they knew the road to church. It fed the whole table off a pot that had already fed them once as soup. Nothing in that kitchen ever got to be finished with its job after only a single meal. Number 16. Della's stretched meatloaf. This is the one that shows you the whole secret at once. In 1942, the government printed a bulletin called Meat for Thrifty Meals, and it said right out loud what Della had always known. Well-seasoned crumbs are the finest extender there is for a cheap cut of meat. She took 1 single pound of the cheapest ground beef, soaked a cup of soft breadcrumbs in a little cold milk, worked it all together with an egg and an onion and salt, and baked it into a loaf. That 1 pound honestly fed 6. 2 extra plates out of nothing more bought. And here is where I am going to get sharp with you for a minute. The store will sell you that same loaf, frozen in a tray, heat and eat, for 8 times what that pound of beef cost, and call it a convenience. It is not a convenience. It is the 20 honest minutes Della spent gladly, sold right back to you at payday prices, with the not knowing marked up highest of all. They are not selling you supper. They are renting you back the thing your grandmother did for free. Number 15. Brewis. This is the one I told you to stay for. Brewis is nothing but stale bread soaked soft in hot milk with a little butter and a little salt, and it is almost too plain a thing to bother writing down. Della learned it from a book 200 years old that says, in so many words, save the hard bits and soak them for Brewis. She poured the hot milk over the bread in a bowl and let it sit until the bread gave up being bread and became something soft enough for an old mouth or a small one. It is a bowl of almost nothing, and every single time I make it, somebody in the comments tells me their own grandmother used to make it, and that they had not thought of it in 40 years, and that they had to go and sit down for a minute. That is what a bowl of almost nothing can do to a person. It is not the recipe they are grieving. It is the hand that used to hold the spoon. Number 14. Bean soup the second day. The beans from number 24 never ended their life as beans. On the second day, Della added water to whatever was left in the pot, and a little more salt, and by supper time the beans had melted down into a thick and gentle soup that tasted like it had been on the stove since the dawn of the world. A slice of bread laid in the bottom of the bowl soaked the whole of it up. That is 2 entire suppers, 2 nights running, out of 1 sack of beans that had cost her pocket change. The trick was never a fresh new pot every night. The trick was 1 pot that flat refused to quit. She would tell you that a pot which only feeds you once is a pot that simply is not trying. Number 13. Milk vegetable soup. When the week left her 4 sad little vegetables and no plan for them, Della turned them into soup with nothing but milk. She melted a spoon of butter, stirred in a spoon of flour until it went smooth, and whisked in 2 cups of milk until it just thickened into a thin white sauce. The chopped vegetables went in, a little more milk to loosen it, a good pinch of salt, and there was a hot pot of soup where 20 minutes before there had been odds and ends bound for the compost heap. Thicken it, and it stood a spoon up like a chowder. Thin it, and it was a light supper for a warm night. The whole table saw a hot meal set before them. Nobody at that table saw the leftovers it had been quietly built from, and that was exactly the way she wanted it. Number 12. A rack of lamb that fed 6. Della's sister up the road did the very same thing with lamb that Della did with beef. She bought the rack, the neck, and the lower rib bones, the part nobody displayed at the front of the case, because nobody fashionable ever asked for it. Child priced it in 1832 at 4 or 5 cents a pound, and swore that 4 pounds of it made a dinner for 6 people, and that arithmetic still holds true at any butcher counter today. She covered it in water and simmered it low with root vegetables until the meat fell clean off the bone. Then she served it as 2 whole courses out of 1 cheap rack. The broth came first, hot in a cup, to take the sharp edge off the hunger and warm you from the middle out. Then the pulled meat over the vegetables. 1 cut of meat that nobody wanted, and it fed 6 people twice at a single sitting. That is not going without. That is arithmetic the rest of the street forgot how to do. Number 11. Stretched meatballs. Same secret as the meatloaf, only rolled into a different shape, so the children were sure it was a different supper. Della took the cheap ground beef, worked in the soft crumbs and the egg, and rolled it into little balls that went twice as far as the meat ever could have gone alone. She browned them and let them finish in a thin gravy or a pot of tomatoes, and served them over anything that would hold them still, a slice of bread, a spoon of beans, a little rice. 1 pound of meat became a plateful for the whole table. Nobody sat there counting the meatballs and working out that they were mostly bread. They were far too busy eating. She said the real trick to stretching meat was to make it so good that nobody at the table ever thought to ask how far it had been stretched. Number 10. Creamed eggs on toast. When the eggs were cheap and the meat was dear, Della made a supper that felt like a splurge and cost like a penny. She made that same white sauce, butter and flour and milk cooked smooth, and folded sliced hard eggs down into it, then spooned the whole soft, rich mess over a piece of toasted, day-old bread. It was warm, and it filled the plate right to the edges, and every single part of it, the egg, the milk, the bread, was among the cheapest things in the entire kitchen. She could set that down in front of you on the leanest Thursday of the whole year, and you would feel looked after. That was the entire point of it. Poor never once had to taste poor at her table. In her hands, it mostly just tasted like being loved. Number 9. Beef stew from the shank. The shank is the cut the animal worked the hardest, and that is exactly why it carries the most flavour and costs the least of anything on the rail. It runs a half or a third of what the loin runs, pound for pound. Della browned it, covered it in the black pot with water and vegetables, and gave it a bare simmer for 2.5 or 3 hours, poking it now and then with a fork, until it finally stopped fighting back. A stew like that fed the whole table, and then the leftover pot, with a little water added, quietly became tomorrow's soup before it had even gone cold. I made this exact stew in this exact pot last Sunday, and I burned the first onions the way I have burned them every single time for 50 years. The cheapest cut on the rail, given the gift of time, beats the dearest cut, given none at all. Time was the one thing that kitchen always had plenty of, and she spent it like a rich woman. Number 8. Rice cooked in the second broth. When the bones had already given up their first broth and been served, Della did not throw them out. She simmered the picked over bones a second time with a bay leaf and any vegetable scrap she had, about 45 minutes, and drew off a thin second broth too weak to ever serve on its own. Then she cooked the rice in that instead of in plain water. That rice came out tasting of the whole week, of the bones and the onion and the bay leaf, all for the price of the water she would have boiled anyway. She called it nothing at all. City people pay good money for that same idea in restaurants, and it comes to the table with a French name and a bill attached. Della got there first, out of pure thrift, and never once thought it was clever. She just could not stand to pour flavour down a drain. Number 7. Milk toast. This is the bowl I still make for anyone I love who is sick. Milk toast is bread and hot milk and almost nothing else. A bowl made for the sick, the very old and the very young, for the mouth that cannot manage anything harder that day. Della toasted the bread, tore it into a bowl, poured warm milk over it with a little butter and salt, and carried it up the stairs to whoever was too weak to come down to the table. I have fed this to my own husband with a spoon when he was too low to lift his head, and I was grateful past all words to have something that simple to give him. It is not a supper you make to impress a single soul. It is a supper you make to say, I am right here, and you are not alone, and there is warm food, and it is going to be all right. Some suppers are meant to feed the body. This one was always meant for the rest of you. Number 6. Baked beans, the Saturday pot. Saturday night in Della's kitchen was baked beans, and the whole house knew it by the smell a full hour before the pot was ready. She took the same navy beans, soaked and softened, and instead of simmering them on top of the range, she set them low down in the oven for hours with the ham bone and let them go slow and deep and sweet. The long patient heat did something the quick simmer never could. It pulled the whole pot together into one dark, tender thing that tasted far above what it had cost her. A dish of that, a slice of bread, and the family ate like they were somebody in this world. It cost like they were nobody. The whole distance between those two facts was Della, standing quiet at the oven door, knowing something. Number 5. A boiled dinner. When the cellar was full and the money was not, Della made a boiled dinner, and it was the cheapest whole meal she knew how to set on a table. She took one modest cut of the cheap meat and covered it in the black pot with water, and then she went down to the root cellar, which was the only cold storage that farm ever had, because there was no freezer anywhere in the house, and she brought up whatever the damp sand and the dark had kept sound since October. Carrots, turnips, an onion, a few potatoes. It all went into the one pot and simmered together the whole afternoon until the meat was tender and the vegetables had drunk up the flavour of it. One pot, one fire, one cheap cut, and the entire family fed off it. She washed exactly one pot afterward. She used to say the finest kitchen tool ever invented was a heavy lid and the patience to leave it on. Number 4. Beans with a fried egg on top. This one is so simple it very nearly feels like cheating. Della took a bowl of last night's beans, warmed them through, and laid 1 fried egg right on the top. The yolk left soft on purpose, so it broke and ran down into the beans like a sauce. That single egg turned a poor bowl of beans into a supper that ate rich, and it climbed the whole plate up into a real meal for the price of exactly 1 egg. The old government bulletins will tell you the protein truly does improve when you do it that way. Della never read it in a bulletin. She did it because a runny yolk over hot beans is one of the plain good things in this life, and it always was, and it cost her next to nothing to put it there. Small money, whole supper. That was the entire art of it. Number 3. The jar of crumbs. I told you back at number 21 to remember the jar. Well, here it is. Della kept a lidded jar of dried breadcrumbs standing on the counter at all times, and that one plain jar did the work of 3 separate things that nobody in the house ever had to buy. A handful bound the meatloaf and the meatballs together. A handful coated the fish or the liver before it ever hit the hot fat. A handful thickened a thin gravy into something that clung to the plate instead of running off it. 1 jar filled entirely from the bread that most houses throw straight in the bin, quietly touched half the suppers on this whole list. That right there is the entire philosophy of that kitchen, held in 1 jar. Nothing left her kitchen as garbage that could have left it as supper instead. The bin was only for what truly could not be used, and in that house the bin was very nearly always empty. Number 2. Cold meatloaf, the second supper. Della never once made a meatloaf to be eaten only a single time. She soaked the crumbs in cold milk before they ever went into the bowl, which meant the loaf stayed moist even a full day later, cold from the spring house. So the second supper was every bit as good as the first. She sliced it thin and cold onto bread for the men heading out to the field. Or she chopped the very last of it up with a potato and crisped it in the pan for a third go at it. 1 pound of the cheapest beef in the shop, and by the time she was finally done with it, it had been supper twice and a field lunch besides. She used to say, "You do not really know how to cook a thing until you know what it becomes on the second day." She knew what everything in that kitchen became on the second day. That was the whole of the education. Number 1. Della's Sunday pot roast. And here at last is the one it all comes down to, the single cut of meat that became 4 different suppers, all of it out of this same heavy black pot. On Sunday, Della bought 1 cheap cut of chuck, the cut that nobody in line ever fussed over, browned it hard and set it to braise low and slow in this pot for the better part of the afternoon, until it carved like something 4 times its price. That was Sunday. That was the roast. Monday, the leftover meat and the pot liquor became the very stew from number 9, water added, vegetables in, a whole second supper standing on its own. Tuesday, whatever the stew left behind went down into that potato shell and came back out as the shepherd's pie from number 19, browned and proud and looking for all the world like it had been the plan the whole time. And Wednesday, the bones that had carried every bit of it went into the water and made the broth from number 23. 10 cents of nothing at all turned into a full week of warmth. 1 cut of meat, 4 suppers. 4 nights her family sat down full, off a single thing she had carried home for pocket change. And not one of those 4 nights ever felt like going without. Because it was not going without. It was the most skilled thing that happened in that whole house all week long. And it happened right here in this pot. and I am still standing here doing it. So let me say the thing out plain now, the way I figure I have earned the right to by this point. The people who came before you were not going without. They were not sad, they were not deprived, they were not losing some quiet contest with the modern world. They knew something. They knew that meat is a flavour and not a master, that the cheapest thing in the shop is often the very richest, that a pot is never finished after just one meal, and that a heel of bread is not garbage until the moment you decide that it is. Somewhere along the way, somebody sold us the exact opposite. Somebody convinced a whole country that cooking is a chore, a burden, a thing a smart and busy person ought to escape. And then that same somebody built a long, bright aisle of heat-and-eat trays and sold us right back at payday prices the very suppers our grandmothers used to make for pocket change. They did not sell us food, they sold us the forgetting. And the forgetting is the single most expensive thing in that entire store. But you are not forgetting. You stayed all the way to number one. You are the reason a bowl of milquetoast still exists in this world, and a jar of dried crumbs, and a dime of soup bones simmering away in a heavy black pot. So tell me, down in the comments, tell me this one thing. What did your family eat when the money was tightest? And would you still make it today? Tell me the dish. I read every one of them, and every single one is somebody's grandmother still cooking. This is Granny Pearl, and I will leave the porch light on for you.